how this goes. Nice to have you all here. I think one of our newest visitors. Glad to have you here. Massachusetts plates on that. His wife just is become employed by the
State Library Director.
The State Library Director. So I think he owns this building, and you probably be nice to him when you introduce yourself. We're going to put it on Zoom. We're going to record it. You can watch it on Ogden Valley Inc. It will be a live presentation. I'm going to turn it over for a minute to, and then 2 minutes to, and then we'll get to the speakers. Thanks so much. We hope you'll stay for questions and get involved in it.
Mr. Last one, can you find that recorded somewhere also?
Everybody raise their hand if they know where to look. Ogden Valley Inc.org. We're putting them all on there, and there's got great, you can put comments, and it's really very helpful.
Has the taxation one been rescheduled?
Yes, we're gonna get to that in a moment.
That's the biggie.
Other questions before we start? Because this is kind of important. We're talking about contracting for services. Other questions?
You know, as I was getting signatures, somebody says, there is no way we could build our city, not a city building, but a city utility building
Yeah.
for $350,000, whatever was in the feasibility.
Well, great.
And I just was, he asked, I go, I wouldn't know.
Well, just pure coincidence. Today I signed the agreement between the city as it's existing in the future with Huntsville Town. And they have agreed to give us space in their beautiful building under construction for zero cost. To try to unite the communities, and so we have available space in a building that will be occupied by hopefully the town and the city, and it will be great. So I'm not really worried about whether somebody says $275,000 building will work.
No, it was 50, because the UDOT garage, he goes, there's no way you could build that. You know, on 39, that UDOT building and the garage and all that, for $350,000.
Yeah.
I wouldn't know.
Then you're right in the right place to ask questions for contracting for services. But the good news is the town of Huntsville has offered Incorporated city space in their beautiful building, so it should be much easier to find the people you're looking for.
How long is that offer available to us?
Offer what?
For Huntsville Town?
I signed it for the next 5 years.
Mark, can you stand over here so maybe Zoom can pick up your voice?
Thank you very much, Zoom. I love you too, but I'm leaving and turning the time over to Wayne Pyle for his presentation. Wayne is a Liberty resident, friend and neighbor, and has done this for a long time. He's been the city manager for Sandy for...
West Valley. Sandy guy's here though.
Okay, I thought you did 2 of them.
Yes, Midvale.
Oh, sorry. Midvale for 7 and West Valley for 21. Not a beginner. I think he'll like it too. So we'll turn it over to
Me.
Yes, Nick
So,
first.
Nick.
quickly,
Sit
I don't want to
down.
take a lot of time, but there is a question about, we're going to try to record these, and where can you find them? This is our webpage. Hopefully you guys have navigated here before. And if you scroll down on this, we have these presentations listed and the dates and so forth. We're going to add another column over to the right where we'll post the YouTubes and whatnot of the recordings, so you can pull these up in the future. So that's coming. It's not there yet, and that's coming on. So let me quickly take a few minutes of your time, if I may. So this is advantages and disadvantages of contracting service. Oh, we gotta let people in on Zoom.
Just make sure there aren't any. Okay, you're good.
I think we're good. All right. So back to this. So that's why you're here. Advantages and disadvantages of contracting. We'll talk about that in a minute. This is the series of meetings. I don't know why it's off the screen, so we probably need to go off of that mode and go to this mode and blow it up that way. So we're going to have these series of meetings coming up. Now you'll see that the taxation one's highlighted. That had to be rescheduled due to a scheduling conflict, so that's still coming up. That's going to be June 16th. July 16th? Well, then who typed this? All right. So that's coming up. That was a good test. Only one person in the room passed. All right. What's coming up next? So as you all know, we're still collecting petitions. We want to get that wrapped up by the 4th of July. We need to submit the petitions to the Lieutenant Governor, who then turns it over to Weber County, who does the validation of everything we've done. Your signatures, whether you own the land, whether you're actually here. That takes them about 45 days, so that'll take them through the end of August, and if all goes well, we should be on this upcoming ballot. If they kick it back for whatever reason, they don't like the signatures, they don't think we've met the criteria, we have 30 days to fix it, but that basically means we're not going to make the 2024 election cycle, we'd be pushed to the next one. And I think I've explained this to everyone before. This is just the vote to incorporate. If we vote to incorporate, we decide as a community to do so, we have to wait another year in order to vote in our leadership. So we're still under the auspices of Ogden, of Weber County, and everything continues as is until we vote in our leadership in 2025. And that's really, let's see, did I have one more slide? No, I think that's all I had. Oh, where to turn in your petitions or be able to sign a petition. If you're still interested in doing so, here's some locations. I think most of you are probably aware of where Peddler's Cafe is. We usually have somebody there from 9 to 5. Again, this is going to be up until about the July 3rd time frame. I think everybody's going to be out at festivities on the 4th. The Drip Coffee and Soda Shop is right next to the Valley Market, so we're there daily from 10 to 6-ish. And there'll be 2 4th of July events, one in Huntsville Park, one in Liberty. We'll be at those for the times shown there. And again, this is all volunteer dependent, since everybody's supporting us are volunteers taking time out of their own day to do this. So they've been turning up very diligently for these, and we appreciate their effort. So that's where you can either find a petition to sign or turn in one that you already have. And that's it. So any questions for me about any that I just walked through?
I have a question.
Yes.
On the 10% from each place, is that those 4 places that you need?
So we have 6 precincts up here, and we have to get 10% of the voters in each precinct.
What are the 6 precincts?
Oh, you would ask me that.
Oh, it's okay, we can figure
All
it out
right.
later.
I can show you a map if you want to stick around and
Okay.
look at it.
After.
It's actually, well,
You see if you can find it, but it's just County, Ogden Valley, Precinct 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And they just divide up the residents of the valley into 6 pretty equal geographical locations, so nobody overwhelms.
And if you want to find out which precinct you live in, there's a sheet up here that has something you can, a link to a precinct located.
so this shows essentially all the precincts. So you have OV1 that's up here in the north, OV2 here, this is kind of the Wolf Creek area. You kind of recognize that. This is, well, on the other side of the main highway. This precinct actually encompasses north. This is all considered north Huntsville. And then we have this huge one, 06, that goes all the way up to Cosby. And here we have, this is on the other side of the Trappers Loop Road and kind of goes down into here. So those are the 6 we have. You see Huntsville shows up here too, but they're their own already incorporated community, so they're not engaged with this. Okay? And we do have big maps blown up that you can take a look at and figure out where you are. We have a precinct locator system that you can type in your address and find out which one of these is you and so on. All right, anything else for me? Otherwise, we will turn it over to the guest speaker. All right.
Okay, I'm gonna take a second to introduce Shane, and I'll be real quick, once again, just in case anybody wasn't here in the first one I spoke, I'll introduce myself real quickly. So Wayne Pyle, been a resident up here for a while. My wife and I have owned a couple of different homes since about '07. We have a great love for the valley. We really enjoy being out here and up here, and so we really see this incorporation effort as being very important. So we wanted to make sure that we could help however we could, hence my interest. My help that I can be to the committee is that because I've been in municipal government for so long, I kind of know who the lineup of suspects are out there for these topics that we have to discuss. What it would be like running the city, what would be the challenges and issues. The one we're going to talk about tonight, advantages and disadvantages of contracting services. The gentleman that I'm going to introduce, as soon as we talk about the topic, I thought he would be perfect for this. The gentleman's name is Shane Pace. He's currently the Chief Administrative Officer of Sandy City and has worked there a couple of different times and for many, many years. Shane and I were in the same Master of Public Administration class at the BYU Marriott School of Management way back in a couple of eons ago. So we've known each other for a long time. And Shane also, to this particular topic, was the very first, what was at the time titled, correct me if I get it wrong, Shane, later, but he was the contract administrator for Taylorsville City, when Taylorsville was first incorporated. So Shane was actually there, negotiated the first, had input on hiring the first employees, of which there were only a few, and did do the negotiation for the contracted services. Why did I mention both of those things? Because it is an important topic here. You do have a lot of different choices as to how you want to provide services. However, it is almost inevitable that we would be contracting services with various entities at first for a lot of different reasons, which I won't go into. But with that, I'll introduce Shane. Like I said, long experience. He is going to have some great stories on this. He warned me that he had one or two that might involve former bosses or myself. I'm a little worried about that. But Shane, thanks again for being willing to do this.
So, yeah, Wayne and I were in graduate school together. He was a year behind me in graduate school. Yeah, Wayne is retired, I'm still working, so obviously he's a little bit smarter than me. I appreciate the opportunity to come tonight, and tonight's discussion is going to be based on the concept that the incorporation is successful and that you will move forward in incorporating and starting up a city. And so I'm gonna talk about, part of it will be about, okay, how do you start up a city? And I want to talk about contracting for services can be a very effective way of doing it. In fact, contracting for services is going to be an essential part of creating a city. Talk about the advantages, talk about the disadvantages, and then finish up talking about some of the things that can help in contracting for services. Some of the things I learned while I was doing. As Wayne said, I was the contract administrator for Taylorsville when incorporated. It was much more difficult to incorporate back then. In fact, the vote on incorporating, the vote on the form of government, and the vote on the elected officials all occurred at once. And then they had 6 months to get up and running. So it's great to know you got a little bit more time. So I was the second employee hired behind the city recorder. What's interesting is you actually function as a corporation for a certain amount of time before you incorporate, and you'll have to work through those issues legally. And was there for negotiating all those contracts up front I was there for the second year when all those contracts had to be renegotiated. And I'll tell you about some of the issues associated with renegotiating those contracts in the second year.
Can I just interrupt?
Yes.
Is there any chance we can turn a light on?
Lights up.
I feel like it's dark.
They turned them down for the slides, so I'm sure we can.
Okay,
I got it.
There's a switch over there.
thank you.
You bet.
And again, if you wouldn't mind standing just a little
I'm
bit.
not responsible for how I look now.
That's
I look
fine.
pretty good at retired, but now.
Even better.
So, let's talk first about if contracting for services is an effective way of providing services to a community. It's especially effective for newly incorporated cities. It is, and then long-term, actually, contracting for services can be an extremely effective way of providing certain services, especially if you're a smaller community. You just don't have the money or the ability to bring on enough full-time people to actually do that. And so contracting for services becomes an excellent way to get that work done and provide those services to your residents. When you're a new city, you can't create 8 departments in 1 year all at once. It's just not possible. And so, by those 8 departments, I mean, you're gonna have to provide police services, you're gonna have to provide fire services, public works services, planning and zoning services. Here, I think everything's taken care of through districts. As far as water, provide that. There's just so many areas where you have to provide services. You can't stand them up all at once. It's just impossible. Nor should you. When you create a department, you need to take a good amount of time to create that department and allow that to move along in a more natural way than hiring a bunch of people and trying to provide services without really having a plan to do that. So it really becomes essential. The other thing an important point is that the actual entities that are providing the services right now, it's important to keep a good relationship with them. Alienating those service providers up front is just, it's not productive, and it's a bad idea. You've been receiving services from those people for a long time, and for the most part, my experience was they provided good services, not at the level I would have preferred, but they provided good services, and they were great for transition to continue. And so some of those you're going to have to depend on those current service providers to continue to provide those services for a certain time until you can get yourself in a position to make change. Let me talk about some of the strengths of contracting for services, and I'm not talking about a new city only here. I'm talking about contracting for services, period. There's some great strengths to it. You don't have to create a workforce. Okay, when Taylorsville incorporated, we hired 12 employees, and all the rest was taken care of through contracts. If we would have had when Taylorsville incorporated, there was 65,000 residents. There were a lot of services to be provided because of that, and we would have needed to have well over 100 to 200 employees within that first year. That's really almost impossible to do in a way without making major mistakes. A lot of these services are technical. A lot of these services require training, require education, require knowing what you're doing, and it's a lot of these positions you have to go through a thorough processes of knowing who you're hiring and making sure that they have the education and the experience and the ability to do the job. So it's really it helps you get going. It's a really great strength. It allows you to run very lean initially. When cities incorporate, and I don't know what you've talked about here, but when cities have incorporated in Salt Lake County, they generally end up with the tax rate that the residents are currently paying to the county through the districts or through service providers, because that's one of the initial concerns of residents when you're incorporated is, well, are my taxes going to go up? So most incorporating cities take the same tax levels that they were paying and make an effort to make that work. And so it allows you to run lean in a lot of ways. You don't have to make a large capital improvement if you're contracting for services. You don't have to buy snow plows, you don't have to buy police cars, you don't have to buy fire engines, you don't have to buy all these things that really are expensive, and you need capital to do it. And capital takes time to build in order to use it. And so that is a huge advantage contracting for services. You can ramp up faster, okay, in a new service area. So if you've got a certain set of services you're providing, but then you realize you have a new area that really needs to be dealt with, and you have a large service provider already, you can negotiate with them and get that service going much faster than if you tried to do it in-house. And so that's a great advantage. All these things, I've done a lot of, not only when I was working for Taylorsville City, but throughout my career, when I was a public utilities director for a number of years, I contracted for services extensively, and only wanted to contract for services in certain areas. And I'll talk about that. Well, let's put it right in. When I was a public utilities director, I contracted out most of my engineering design work. I didn't want to hire a bunch of engineers, bring them on, do a number of projects, and then have them sit while I'm waiting to develop new capital to do more projects. So by contracting out those engineering services, I was able to flex toward what kind of capital we had. The other thing that we did, of course, extensively is we contracted out the capital projects. And some of these projects, they get really large, especially if you're running long lengths of stormwater pipe, or if you're putting in a streetlight system citywide, and contracting for those services is just an excellent way to get it done. So there's some other services that really work well. Waste collection has been, for most cities, the best way is to contract for those services. There are a number of really large waste collection companies throughout the United States. You can always get multiple bids, multiple competitive bids, versus starting your own waste collection department. Yes?
Just, so if we had to get a police force, but you don't have to get police cars, do you have to like create like a building for them, basically?
Well, it depends. If you're contracting for services with another entity, i.e. the county,
Yeah.
or the sheriff, who already has all those facilities, you don't need to have a building. You don't need to purchase police cars.
Would you take a sec, Shane, and that was a great question,
Yeah.
which kind of allows us to move into a topic. Would you talk a second a little bit about the political consideration that goes into making a decision as specific as that? So a city, like for example, Ogden Valley right now, yeah, the sheriff just comes up from Ogden, there's no facility here, so their presence is defined by patrol car. But I could see a situation where a city might want to have some kind of facility here.
Yeah.
Not saying that you really don't, but could you talk about a little bit about the thought process that goes into making those decisions once an elected official group gets together?
Yeah. So for most incorporations, and especially in the first years of the incorporation, residents are the ones who push certain services. Now, I don't know of an incorporation that hasn't started because of planning and zoning. That's where you have residents have the most dissatisfaction in the county where they're living, that's what gets it almost always gets it started, is planning and zoning decisions. And residents want more control of that, and that's why they want to incorporate. Now, there will be some, but that's all they want. That's all they ever want. We have cities in Salt Lake County that have never brought on any other service other than planning and zoning in-house, and they still to this day contract out all their services, because that was their priority, and the rest of the services they have felt satisfied, and there's never been a, when I went to Taylorsville, there was a really popular book back in the late 90s called Reinventing Government. And that book was all about using private enterprise to provide services to residents. It was a great book. It had some great concepts in it. A lot of the newly elected officials of the city had read that book, and so they decided that was going to be their theme. They wanted to hire about 12 employees, and they wanted to contract for services for the long term. Okay, that's not what happened, because after a while, and I'll talk about some of these, but after a while, their police services became so expensive through the county that they felt, and there was so much complaint from the community that they wanted better police services, that they stood up their own police department. And they did it about, I think, 7 years in, was it? Yeah. And it took them a while to get it going and everything, but there was kind of this public outcry again, just like what happened with planning and zoning. There became this public outcry again. We want our own police department. We want our own police officers. We want to see our police officers in our community. We don't want to see a county sheriff every once in a while. We want more. And I'll tell you, having worked for a city that I worked for Sandy City before I went to Taylorsville, and then I went back to Sandy City after Taylorsville. I always was very proud at the service levels that we provide residents, and coming from Sandy and going to Taylorsville as a new city and seeing these services, it was obvious. Before I went to Taylorsville, I would read the weekend reports from the police department. And I would read, that there was this incident, there was this person that was caught and arrested and taken to jail. And then when I got to Taylorsville, I'd read the same reports every weekend, and I would read this event occurred and nothing else. And this event occurred and this event occurred. No arrests were happening over the weekend now, and I couldn't understand that. I was so used to seeing, 50 to 60% of the crimes having an arrest within 24 hours. That it shocked me just to see event after event. And what was happening is that the sheriff was showing up after the fact, taking a report and heading off to the next place where he needed to take a report. And so that's why I believe in Taylorsville, eventually the residents just, they demanded to have their own department and provide those services. Yes?
So the thought that raises in my mind, and you've been talking a little bit about this and alluding to this when you were talking about at the very beginning, not getting your contract providers or maintaining that relationship with them. The point of that in some effect was, I think, and I'd like you to explore that a little bit too, is there's a balance there, right? On the one hand, you need to have good relationships with them, but on the other hand, you gotta be in touch enough with the citizens group and the elected officials and that to know what the residents really prioritizing.
Right. Even back then, when I was at Taylorsville, we had a very good relationship with the county sheriff's office. And there were a number of efforts made. So the one thing you have to understand about your current service providers is that they have a workforce. They want to keep their workforce, and when an area is incorporated and no longer uses their services, they have to do layoffs. Because they can't just absorb those because they're no longer receiving your taxes to provide those services. And so most of the time they will go to great lengths to try and be available, to try and provide that service for you so that they don't have to go through that process. And that was the case with the county sheriff's office. They were very responsive that way. And there was a lot of very good interactions back and forth. I met with the captain over our area every week. We went through calls. We went through all sorts of things on a weekly basis. And had a very good relationship with him most of the time. The county sheriff would come to all of Taylorsville City's events on purpose to keep that relationship. But over time, it wasn't good enough. Over time, residents weren't getting the service that they really wanted. The one thing you'll experience as a new city is that people are going to want more. They're naturally going to want more than what they are getting and expect more. And that's just the nature of the business. All of a sudden, they have a city that they can call, and it's their city. They take much more ownership in their city than they do a county or a district. And so the elected officials, they have to deal with that. They have to be ready to deal with that. That all of a sudden, residents who would never call the county for something will call the city on a weekly basis about something. I know because I got all those calls in the first year.
You brought up that, number of the incorporations and stuff like that, the motivation behind that is the problem with essentially the planning and zoning, the way it's going down. Our service provider is literally what created the situation. So, and with their concern about the potential laws, the way they're written and everything, even they are concerned about the legal battles they get into, and the army of lawyers and the court business and all that sort of stuff. So, if we were to crank this up, knowing that that's imminent, and probably would be inappropriate to get services from those same people, because when they're helpful, they're helpful, and when they're not, they're not.
Yeah.
You know? So,
Those problems don't go away.
how would you anticipate contracting for somebody who would perform planning, zoning, and the legal structure to essentially hold your own against what would be the previous problem?
Well, I can tell you what Taylorsville did. Taylorsville brought in a community development director, and Taylorsville brought in a planner, and did all of the planning services with those 2 employees for a 65,000 population city.
And in-house.
In-house.
To be clear, not.
And it worked, and it worked quite well, and people became very happy about having elected officials that were responsive to their concerns, and staff that would answer their calls and actually talk with them about proposed developments and spend time with them dealing with those issues. Now, that part of the incorporation and that part of the initial years worked very well. They didn't always agree with the situation, with the decisions that were made, but the biggest thing is they appreciated being listened to. They appreciated being able to spend time with those employees and with those elected officials, and that was the big difference for them.
I was wondering, here in the valley, we just got this monumental development issue as opposed to Taylorsville. You know, it's huge here, it's floating. And would you essentially get yourself a whole posse of lawyers, contract a whole posse of lawyers?
No.
Because it seems like there'd be a lot of legal work that always goes on.
No, Taylorsville, as large as it was, we hired a contract attorney, and that contract attorney worked with us throughout that whole time, and he was not spending his whole time on Taylorsville. He only spent part of his time on Taylorsville, and it worked quite effectively. And Taylorsville was still developing at the time. It was still developing at the time. Yes?
Our current services that you're discussing are provided by Weaver County Sheriff.
Right.
Morgan County Sheriff has approached me and said, we'd love to be a considered entity. tell me about the expanse of considered entities.
Sure. Reinventing government said, oh, you can go out and get every single service from the private sector. I'm here to tell you that's not true. You won't be able to. You have to provide to the public sworn police officers. You have to provide to the public certified EMTs and paramedics and firefighters. There's certain services you're not going to go to the private sector for. You have to get it from the public sector. I know of cities that contract with other cities to provide services. And they're very successful at it. Saratoga Springs provides police service to Bluffdale City. And it's about as far as what you're doing. Having, the more you have, the better off you are. Because you get to negotiate a little bit. When you're only looking at one service provider, your negotiating power is diminished. It's just part of that.
Are there organizing bodies that actually maintain a certain level of quality within these different types of services?
Are there bodies that have certain standards?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, there are national standards in public works, there's national standards in police work, there's national standards in fire, there's national standards in planning and zoning. They all have national organizations, they all have national standards.
And ratings?
Yes.
So you can see how we were versus
But
Morgan?
I will be, they're there and they're useful to a certain extent. I'll give you an example. Fire standards, the national standards are NFPA standards, okay? Those are nationwide standards. I will tell you right now, you will never be able to build a fire department and meet their standards. Those standards were developed over time with a lot of feedback from unions. And so the requirements, the requirements that they have in those standards are so high, it becomes so expensive to provide those services, and you have to look at it and say, do we really need that many firefighters on duty and in the engine? Do we really need, you have to go through those exercises as a city because it gets really expensive. Yes?
So I have to assume there's the National Association of Municipalities or the National Association of, city managers or some
Yeah,
entity
both.
like that.
Yeah.
That has like RFPs that have already been written for this kind of a situation.
I'll get to that in a
we can
minute, yes.
grab and use, so we can get multiple bidders for providing services. So that was one question. The other question is, do you have a guideline for, as a city starting out and not knowing what it is the citizens are gonna demand next? We know planning and zoning, we don't know what's next. How long should we contract? A year, 2 years, 3 years? My experience says the longer you contract, the better price you get, but.
I have a recommendation on that. I'll get to that in just a second. Let me.
On that subject, when you answer it, can you follow up with describing what the League of Cities and Towns in Utah is, so that we'll understand that vocabulary?
Yeah, I'll answer that right now. That's an association of municipalities and towns throughout the city. I believe it's at 249.
Or more, I can't remember, the number changes.
Yeah, they have a board. That board's made up of mayors and council members from around the state. They make sure there's representation from around the state. It is a big lobbying factor at the state legislature. They lobby on behalf of cities and towns and municipalities. Most of the time, they're able to lobby on behalf of all of the cities and towns. Once in a while, they can't because a piece of legislation is actually beneficial to large cities and not beneficial to small cities, or vice versa. And at that point, they have to kind of back out, and those cities are left to working with directly with their own legislators to deal with those issues. So,
What about resources? Do they have like, can you call on them to ask them, advisors?
yes, actually they do. They recently funded a kind of a traveling city manager that can go from location to location, spending time in those cities, those towns that were so small that they can't afford to have a full-time city manager, that will go to those cities and will work for that city for a certain amount of time. And that's been, from what I've heard, that's been actually very successful. They come in, they provide some expertise, they help them get some things done, then they move on to the next city, then they'll be back the next month and kind of do the same thing again. And so it helps things move along for these really small cities. Your city at 5,000, I wouldn't consider really small for Utah. It's actually, there's a lot of cities a lot smaller than that here in Utah. But it's going to run like a really, really small city for a number of years. Okay. There is a Utah City Managers Association. Wayne and I have been part of that our whole careers. It's a great organization. Most city managers are very willing to provide help and work with communities who really need it. They have to be a little bit careful sometimes. For me, it's really easy to come up to Huntsville and talk with you. If this was an incorporation dealing with an area next to the city next to me, or next to my city, that would be a little bit more, I'd have to be more careful, I'd have to check things out before I did it. But for the most part, most city managers are happy to provide expertise and provide. I know that Matt Dixon, North Ogden city manager, has done a lot of work with cities trying to help them through recruitment processes, trying to help them through visioning processes, developing a strategic plan for your community. He's done a lot of that in the past, and it's been very helpful for a lot of cities because if they're paying them a lot less than what consultant. Let me go into some of these things I've learned. First of all, and foremost, you need to have an experienced attorney. And that attorney needs to be able to write a clear definition of services, okay? One of the things that we experienced in the first year at Taylorsville is that we got all our contracts in place and we thought we had everything covered. We weren't. And it goes back to what I was talking about earlier. All of a sudden, you have a lot of residents that realize they have a city now, and they have someone they can call about a need that they have. And so you have this dramatic increase of people calling saying, well, can you help me with this issue? And if it's not in one of those contracts, now remember, you've based your contracts on your budget and the revenue that you have coming in. So you don't generally have any leftover money sitting around that you can all of a sudden spend on an issue out of the blue. You know, you might have a contingency line item that has so much money in it, but and so the better you are at writing clear definitions of services in your contracts, the better off you're going to be. Now, you can go too far with that. You can actually put Public Works is a classic example. Public Works does a lot more than maintains roads and builds storm drain lines. There are a lot of things that a Public Works department will do and are asked to do. If you had to put every single thing that a Public Works department could do into a contract, your contract's going to be a really expensive contract. You have to at some point say, we're going to provide these services, we're not going to provide these services. But be clear about that. That's really important. And for me, it was difficult to have residents calling me and say, well, you know, I've got this problem with this sidewalk, and because we didn't put it in the contract with Salt Lake County wouldn't do anything about it. And so I had to tell them, well, you're going to have to wait till at least next year when we can get something in the contract about it. And so that's, make those definitions really, really clear. Again, some service, well, again, I already stated, keep a positive relationship with contractors with weekly meetings and invite them to events. You might only have them for another 3 years, but those 3 years is critical to have that good relationship with them. When you're contracting for services, unless you have a multi-year contract, you are renegotiating every year. And it is different negotiating with another governmental entity versus a private business. They're even different agreements. With another governmental entity, you're doing an interlocal agreement, which is a different structure than a traditional contract with a private business. And a lot of these entities will have a desire for multi-year contracts. Actually, that can be a benefit. Okay. The experience we had in Taylorsville is that we did one-year contracts for police, for fire, for public works with Salt Lake County. The next year came around and those contracts increased dramatically. And the reason why they increased dramatically is because in the meantime, after those three departments had negotiated with us, they had this incredible desire to continue to provide these services to save those jobs for those employees that they had. They didn't bother to go to the county auditor. Well, the county auditor, after all those contracts were signed, got a hold of those contracts and said, you're not charging the true cost of providing these services. And he audited every single one of our contracts for what, and all of a sudden, he was adding in the partial cost of every county commissioner, partial cost of every administrative employee in the county. Saying, this is your portion of this employee in the county. And those contracts increased dramatically. If we would have negotiated multi-year contracts with a built-in increase, we wouldn't have been subject to those dramatic increases.
Will the county pay for the first temporary year or test year, whatever it is?
Back then they didn't. I don't know how the law is structured now. Back then, now they will actually provide you some startup money. Back then they wouldn't even provide us startup money. We actually had to take a loan out from the county and pay that loan back to function for the first 6 months before the city was able to incorporate and start collecting taxes. And then remember, taxes are collected in what month? November. Okay, so depending on when you start up if you start up your city in January, you don't have your money until November. So you have to issue tax anticipation notes to provide the services while you're waiting for those taxes to come in.
For the first year?
For the first year.
But until we have our council and mayor?
Yeah.
No, I think you're distinguishing two different things. So say we have this election in 2024, until we vote in our leadership in 2025, nothing really changes. We don't have contracts. I mean, it just stays the way it is. We also don't have any control over anything. It's not until we're in 2025 when we vote in our leadership, all this starts to kick in.
So you talked about earlier the ability to contract with a different county sheriff for services. That might be a fantastic idea. Just remember, if it turns out not to be, it's going to be harder to go back to Weber County and get a contract with them. That's just the nature of, because they'll have taken care of what they needed to take care of to right-size themselves after losing it, and might not be interested anymore. You never know.
Shane, on that question, I get a line item on my taxes. It says this much for the school, this much for the county sheriff, this much for municipal services. How many of those categories change the day we become incorporated?
All three of those go away. And you will have one tax as a municipality. Now, like I said before, most incorporations, they will set a certified tax rate that will be approximate to what their residents were being charged as a property tax before. So it might include all three of those if all three of those are going away. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. Let me talk to you about a couple of other issues. I talked about that experience of not having in the contract what you needed, okay? And I just got to tell you this funny experience that we had, okay? We had a contract with Salt Lake County Animal Control to provide animal control services, okay? But we had this situation that occurred. People love to buy little white geese and give them to their kids at Christmas or other holidays. Well, what they don't understand is those little white geese turn into really big white geese, and they're not very nice. They start biting all the time. And so they don't know what to do with them, and so they dump them off in the nearest canal. And those geese start living in the canal. Well, we had a whole brood of them, okay, living in one of the canals in Taylorsville. And they would get out of the canal in this grass area right next to this taco time. These people thought it was fun to feed them food. Well, the group got well over 100. Okay? It was just a huge group. And they started expanding. And so they would walk single file across Redwood Road. So you'd have 100 of them crossing Redwood Road, single file, and they go over to the other side and start bothering people over there. Well, we started getting some complaints about it, and we just kind of ignored it. Don't worry about it, you know. And because they got over there one day and they knocked over an elderly woman and she broke her hip. That's when all of a sudden we couldn't ignore it anymore. And I said, you've got to take care of this problem. You're the city now. You do it. It's your job. And so we called Salt Lake County Animal Control. They said, we don't deal with geese. It's your problem. So we went, what do we do? You know, and so at the time,
Franchise Kentucky Fried Goose.
yeah. We didn't think about that. We thought about killing them all and taking them all to the homeless shelter. And the homeless shelter said, geese are so hard to clean that there's no way we could absorb them. You just can't do it. So no, thank you, but no, thank you. And at the same time, it got in the news, and PETA started calling us on a regular basis. What are you going to do with these geese? And so we had this, because we had at the time, we hired a person to be our city marshal. Really what we wanted to do is code enforcement, but he kind of wanted to act as a police officer. But so he and I got this bright idea, okay? We got this bright idea that we would go get some baled bread from a bakery and we would play Pied Piper. And so we went there and we started throwing them pieces of bread and walking backwards, walking down the canal corridor, under 4700 South over to Taylorsville Park. Because we thought they'll be fine over to Taylorsville Park, away from the taco time, away from Redwood Road and all this stuff. And so we did exactly that. It was a nightmare. I can't tell you how many times I got, so there's two of us just doing this with 100 following. I can't tell you how many times I got. I mean, they were ruthless. But we thought, all right, we did it. Got them all over there. And went home that night. I came back the next day. They're all right back in this spot. And so we said, now what do we do? And one of the state legislators at the time, he said, well, I had this problem with ducks at a property I was managing. And so I just went and bought some beer and I fed them bread soaked in beer. And they all got very docile, and I walked around and picked them all up, and I took them to where I wanted to take them to. He said it was really easy. So we thought, okay, let's do that. Our city marshal's going to the store and buying like 3 12-packs. And he comes back, and we soak all this bread, and we throw it out there to all these geese. Well, geese don't act the same as ducks. Geese brawl. And so all of a sudden, we had 100 geese brawl. And there was this big, huge brawl going on that we're just going back. We're not getting in the middle of that. That's not going to happen. They never got docile. They never laid down. Nothing. They just sat there and fought for like 2 hours. So we're still trying to figure out what to do, you know, because we're still not getting much co-op. Finally, we got Salt Lake County Animal Control to provide us with a trailer, an enclosed trailer. So we literally, our city marshal literally got about a half a mile down the canal. We put fencing on the other end of the canal, this orange fencing. And the fencing went into the trailer, led to the trailer. He got his 2 dogs in the water. He got in the water, let's go down here, with his 2 dogs swimming, and started swimming towards those geese. And they slowly got closer and closer and closer, and pretty soon they started going in the trailer. They all, eventually, we got them all in the trailer, every single one of them, because they wanted nothing to do with those dogs. And so we got them all in the trailer, we shut the door, and they started brawling. And the trailer is literally going like this. But we had contained them, we could move them now, and we moved over to West Valley City. And
I knew West Valley was going to be involved here somewhere.
And they didn't come back. So we solved that problem, but that's the type of thing that you do when you're a new city and you don't have certain services part of your contract services. And so the other problem with negotiating contracts is that sometimes they break down, okay? And you can't always anticipate that. I'll tell you just one more story here. This also has to do with us. Because the residents were really angry with Salt Lake County as far as planning and zoning, they wanted nothing to do with planning, zoning, or building inspection through Salt Lake County. And so we started negotiating with West Valley City to provide those services. And we made great progress. I was working with Wayne's boss, John Patterson, who was the city manager at the time, making really good progress. We had it all lined up. They were going to hire some additional staff and provide these services to us. We had the amount agreed to. Everything was going really well, except for our brand new mayor, very inexperienced and not a lot of wisdom. We needed a place. I'm ecstatic that you've got a place to go, and we didn't have a place, and so we literally had to rent a strip mall, and we had to make improvements into that strip mall for council chambers and for offices and things. And we did all that, and he invited the press to come and see what we'd done, and then he proceeded to say how much more frugal and inexpensive this was than these Taj Mahals that were built in West Valley City, Sandy, and West Jordan. Well, the article came out. The next morning I got a call from John Patterson, who basically told me, tell your mayor, with lots of colorful words, that we will never contract any service with Taylorsville in the future. And some more colorful words. And that was that. We were then forced to go to the Salt Lake County and grovel with them to provide us with those building inspection services. And so that's just, you can't anticipate everything. These things kind of happen, and so you have to react to it. And did we get the best price from Salt Lake County on those building inspection services? No, we didn't. They could basically ask what they wanted. And we were so late in the process at that point. So that's just one of those you have to be aware of and watch out for. Again, I talked about multi-year contracts is a really good thing. And I think that one of the things that you talk about and you negotiate in those multi-year contracts is the ability to amend them without creating a new contract. Amend them for additional services you might want to receive or services you no longer want to receive from them without having to redo the whole contract and redo a whole new price. And I think if you do that, you're going to be in much better shape. Yes?
Does our feasibility as it fund or results as it has been explained to us, we have sufficient funds to cover all those that you just discussed, those contracts we have for the first, the feasibility study says we have sufficient funds to
Yeah.
start all this process.
And that's good news, because not all feasibility studies come out that way. There's still areas in Salt Lake County that have never incorporated, they've created townships instead because the feasibility studies never came out. Right in the dead center of Sandy is a community called White City, right in the middle. I mean, we're basically a donut hole. It's a donut hole right in the middle of our community. They can never incorporate because every time they did the feasibility study, and they're about the size what you're gonna be, it didn't come out, it never came out well. Now they're gonna end up incorporating because of a state, some legislation that occurred last year about islands and getting rid of islands throughout the county, and so, yes?
What sounds to me equally important is figuring out if you have enough money, is do you have enough extra money? Because this is all about money, is what I'm hearing. And if you are relying on people to figure things out, but oops, we forgot this, we forgot that, then it all comes down to what your surplus is. So 5% in one city is not the same as 5% in another. So what is this surplus exactly, and how do you see that covering these oops, or we didn't think of that, or oh, a road disintegrated, now we gotta pay for it, or.
Let me answer it 2 ways. One is, yeah, I made a big point about there's gonna be a lot of things that you just don't anticipate in the contracts. It doesn't mean you have to provide that service. That becomes a policy decision by your elected officials. You might have people calling about a certain service, and you talk about it as elected officials and say, we're not gonna provide that service. We can't. So that's one thing. The other thing was the very next point I was gonna make is that you need to hire enough staff who know municipal services to catch a lot of this stuff.
Like, you know, you have a record snow year, and all of a sudden you run out of, you know, money to pay for snow. The county still comes, because we're the county, right? So it doesn't matter, but if you only have so much money, then do you just start picking which roads not to plow? Or, I mean, how does that work?
No, I don't know a city that doesn't do it. Even brand new cities, I don't know a city that doesn't do a contingency. You tap into that contingency. You have to have a contingency. There's just too many things you can't anticipate. We tap into our contingency all the time for snow removal services. You don't want to get that line item so high that every year you've got thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars just sitting there for the one year in 10, and you're not able to use that to provide other services. And so you got to have a contingency in that. You have to have a minimum 5%, but you can have as high as 25.
We changed the law.
It's just changed the law.
20, I think it is 25.
I think it's 25 now. Now, I know a lot of cities that have it much higher than that. Now, the state auditor will send you a nasty letter if you get over 40%. They send you a letter saying your fund balance is too high and you need to use those funds. I also the third city I worked for in Utah was Farmington, Utah. Every year we had to make sure we got under that 40% because that was just something that city got to at one point and was going to keep it no matter what.
Why does the state auditor have any say in how much of a contingency fund you want to keep for yourselves?
Well, the state law says that, 5 to 40.
Really?
And that was, just like every other state statutory choice, the state legislature made that law and made the state auditor responsible for it, and so that's how that occurred. Now,
He doesn't enforce it, I'll tell you that.
And an important point to remember that goes along with that, but it's much more general to the state of cities, and to talk to any legislator, and they will say this: cities are a creation and a creature of the state. They only exist because of the state. They only exist because we allow them to exist. So any condition that we want to put on them as a legislature, that's up to us.
And according to our state doctor, that's true. Other states it's different, but for most states, they function under this doctrine.
Just go right with that. So do they assume some type of responsibility that if you blow through that contingency like a major storm, that they could provide you some contingency support since they're the one that puts you in that situation?
No, what they will do is come and send you a nasty letter and say, you better get yourselves in order, or we will come and put it in order for you. And they have various methodologies for doing that, but I actually haven't seen that occasion occur in many, many years, at least that I can remember or know. Do you, Shane? And that may be just an effect of the last couple of decades of fiscal, soundness in Utah. I don't know, but West Valley actually ended up in that situation 2 or 3 years after they incorporated back in, it's like 82, 83, and the state had actually threatened to come in and take over operations of it. They would take control of the city's sales tax and property tax as it was generated, and then make the operational decisions. It never came to that because West Valley at the time got itself together and streamlined their operations and made it work.
But even then,
it could happen.
What that means is they're gonna hire a city manager and have them come
Right.
run the city for.
Yeah, they're not gonna do it themselves because
They're not doing
they
it
don't have
themselves.
the people to do that.
Just a couple more points. If you think you might need it, you're gonna need it. That's essentially what I learned in the first. Now, I talked about the downside that when we renegotiated our contracts after that first year, it was shocking. Fortunately, we had the funds to do it, but a lot of the things that we thought, oh, we're gonna have this money to be able to do this, we couldn't because those increases. And so that's why keep a good relationship with the ones you're contracting with, and if you can, multi-year. My last thing, I don't know how some will react to this, but plagiarize. It's not illegal in the public sector. Okay? What I said, like Taylorsville, we had 6 months to put everything together. We had to put a whole set of ordinances together in 6 months. Well, we plagiarized extensively. A lot of it came from Sandy, a lot of it came from West Valley City, and a lot of it came. And one of the best practices you can do is go out and find what you like out of multiple ordinances or multiple practices and bring it back to this and figure out what's going to work for you. That was when I first started with Sandy City. We did a lot of benchmarking of other cities, and we did that on purpose because we went out to try to find the best practices we could find, and then we would bring those practices back and we try and figure out how to implement that at Sandy City. We got a lot of great improvements in our services because of that. It's absolutely necessary as a new city. You've got to plagiarize, and that means everything from city ordinances to employee policies to policies within your police department and your fire department. There's a lot of great stuff out there. There's a lot of great things that cities have done. But you gotta ask around, you gotta check it out, you gotta bring it back, you gotta compare it. And then the great thing is that you can sit down and pick the best of from all of them and put it together. So, yeah.
I was just gonna make a point again. This is one of those reasons why contracting services is so appealing right up front, because it gives you more time to go out and look for those best examples and best practices that you want to implement later.
Well, speaking of best practices, is it LRB? Is that the feasibility?
Yes, Lewis County.
So who else have they done feasibility studies, and how have those cities?
I would imagine.
Yeah, they've done a bunch. I can't remember. They had a list of them at the last public meeting. They're one of the two that get hired normally to do these feasibility studies. The other one used to be Zions, but Zions doesn't do them anymore. So they've done a number. But I can't remember.
LRB claimed to have done about 15 of them,
Yeah.
and none of them had failed.
But the other important point is that organizations like or companies like LRB or Zions, they've also done so much extensive work, financial work for so many cities they have, and they just have a huge database of information.
That's actually a really good point. In addition to the feasibility studies, what Zions and Lewis Young Robertson Birmingham, as well as other public finance entities at different banks, they have all, anytime a city goes out for a bond issue on something, whatever it is, sewer system, the same sort of action plan, to an extent, is done the same way before a bank will finance them. So these entities like them, like Shane said, are already really familiar with most of these entities.
And they, yeah, they have done so much work and they have so much sitting there. Plus, their employees are so experienced in so many things. They really become great experts. I've probably gone too long, but I do want to say one last thing, and I'll answer any other questions you might have. My best advice about contracting for services is contract for service because it makes sense and works. Don't treat it as a theme or a value, or you gotta look at it and say, does this really work? Is this the best thing we can do for our residents? And a lot of times it will be, especially up front when you're a brand new community. But as time goes on, you're gonna have to make those judgment calls. If you do it just to be doing it, sooner or later it's going to create a problem for you. Like, from my opinion, Taylorsville and their police services. Over time it became a problem, and they ended up having to bring it in-house, even though they really wanted to contract for services for everything.
As a philosophy,
As a
which
philosophy.
is what you're alluding to.
Yeah. So, any other questions?
Did they, sorry. Did they just think they were gonna save money by contracting out rather than doing their own? Is that the intent?
That's always one of the things that they think, is because there's always this thing, well, in the private sector, they don't pay as good of benefits, or they don't pay as good of retirement as the public sector does, and so obviously the public sector costs are gonna be more. Well, what they don't take into account over here is the profit. And the profit in some of these contracts gets pretty high. And so I have seen, when I've seen when public sector entities and private sector entities get a bid, both bid, public sector beats private sector a lot for that reason.
So I'm in a room full of really smart people, and I'm not one of them. But if I can just ask, I'm curious to know if the incorporation goes through and you're stuck paying the bill from now on, what about any problems that the county was responsible for creating in their developing? Who pays for fixing all the water development up here and
Well,
different things?
Water development, I doubt you're gonna have to deal with as a city, because there's so many different districts, and they're all receiving water from the same entity. But there are other things, no question. Sandy has had, at one point, I think we had 60 islands in our city, county islands. And a lot of them have annexed in over time. In fact, by 2027, they'll all be in because of new legislation, because the county is tired of providing services to county islands finally. Took them a while. A lot of problems in those islands, and the city has had to go and take care of them.
So you are responsible for
Once you're the
the
city.
mistakes of the county?
Oh, yeah.
I'll just give you an example. Okay, I'll just give you an example. We annexed in this really nice neighborhood, very high income neighborhood, in the Willow Creek area, next to Sandy. There were 2 bridges that went over to a small subdivision on the other side. About 7 years after we annexed that area in, the state came to us and said, those 2 bridges are failing and you need to replace them. And so we had to start working on it. We got the design work done. But in that case, you also had to have self-determination. And what we did is we went to our federal delegation and we asked them to help us fund these bridges. And they did. And so in the end, all we paid for was design work. But if it was still in the county, we wouldn't have been able to go to our own federal legislative delegation and ask them to help us. So,
Can I add to that?
Yeah, please.
So it's an awesome question, and I keep hearing that come up in the community from a discussion standpoint. And the point I always go back to is, it's our problem anyway. It's just our problem right now as taxpayers individually, as opposed to a city where we have a little bit more determination to deal with it in, whatever way that might be. But yeah, capital services in particular, so whatever it is, whether it's a building or a road or whatever, a lot of times in governmental entities, those are the first things that get delayed because there's much more urgent costs, right? So the question's an awesome one. There may be things out there that we will find out later on should have been replaced at a faster rate, or some bridge is failing. I can't think of any that we've got around, but there probably are. And the bottom line is, yeah, we're responsible for that right now. The difference is, at least now, we would have a little bit more attention to the problem.
It sounds simple, but think about when you were younger and you were subject to your parents and their budget. And then think about now in your own life, and you have complete authority over your own budget. It's kind of like that, frankly. I mean, you get to have more control, and you get to prioritize as you see fit.
But you are responsible.
For the most part, I have never talked to a city that incorporated that regretted it. I haven't. They love self-control. They absolutely love the self-control.
Do you feel like there's a critical mass? I mean, I guess one of the concerns is we are not, our population's so small. Do you feel like there's a critical population point, that kind of a sweet spot where you could be too small and not ready, or?
That's been debated for, I don't know, 50 years at the National Association of City Managers, forever. They've done studies, they've done all sorts of things, but the reality is it always depends. For instance, this area is more rural, right? This area actually doesn't want a lot of the improvements you see in larger metropolitan areas. You'll never have those improvements here because you really don't want them. Most people in these rural areas hate streetlights. Most people who live in urban areas love streetlights, and they want them, and they're willing to pay for them and things. And so all those kinds of things have an effect on that decision. 80% of the people in Sandy love streetlights. 20% absolutely hate them. But our citizens voted in a referendum to do streetlights.
So, and I'm playing a little bit of catch up here, because this meeting and the ones moving forward are under the assumption that this is all moving forward. So again, I'm playing a little bit of catch up, but why was it that Snow Basin and Powder Mountain, I mean, how does that determine that? I know that's not a question for you, but how did that get determined?
Well, let me answer that.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
when we were trying to decide the boundaries and who would be in and who would be out, we did approach Snow Basin and Powder Mountain. Snow Basin said, thank you very much, but we're not really interested. They have plans of someday becoming their own city, and so they're going to span Weber County and Morgan County, but they're setting themselves up to be their own entity someday. And what you tend to run into also with large developments like that is they get premium service from the county, because the county is envisioning this as a massive, cash opportunity. So they're working very well and very carefully with Weber County, and they are doing well together. So that was Snow Basin. Powder Mountain, before Reed Hastings took over it, they had some financial challenges that we did not want to inherit. One of the challenges with Powder Mountain was when it was first being set up and envisioned, the county entered into an agreement with them that the county would be responsible for maintaining the roads up at the top of the mountain. And currently, the county does not collect sufficient funds from that environment to pay for the services that they provide. It's a financial hole that they've kind of fallen into. So as you can imagine, when we met with the Weber County Commissioners to talk about this, they were all very excited about us taking over there. Yeah, this would be great. We think you would do very, very well. So then we looked a little closer. We said, well, if you want that, there's something going on. Anyway, long and short of it is, Powder Mountain was not financially viable. We thought Snow Basin would be a great fit, but they turned us down.
Okay, no, thank you.
You mentioned the annexing. How does that work? Like in the future, if Powder Mountain, did want to join, or we wanted to add them on?
It depends on your elected body. Most of the time, most of the time, entities require a petition for annexation from those entities, and then they go through the process of trying to decide whether they want to annex it or not. Over time, you'll get those. They'll come in over time. People, and but unfortunately, a lot of times, some of them come in like that. Like, oh, please, annex us, and you look at it and go, not the right time.
And just a little reality to that, several years ago, I asked Huntsville Town, can we just change the boundaries of Huntsville Town? That's called annexation. Doesn't require a feasibility study, doesn't require anything. They said, no, we like just the way we are, our little peninsula, and we don't want outer darkness in our little peninsula. Do your own thing. And so that's what started it 3 years ago.
You had a question.
Yeah, at the beginning, you made a comment for 8 departments. Could you rattle off an exhaustive list of the departments in a city your size?
Sure.
To see what we wouldn't necessarily need?
We have police, we have fire, we have public works, we have public utilities, we have economic development, we have a legal department. Our size, we have quite a size of a legal department. We have
Animal.
Animal control is part of our police department, so it's a division.
Same client.
Parks and Rec, thank you. That's the other big one that you have, and it just depends on your community. West Jordan, for instance, West Jordan has no recreational programs. They still depend on the county to provide those recreation programs, and they're perfectly happy with that. Sandy got really into recreation services, and our residents really love it. There's no way we could back off of it now. It's one of their most popular services, and so we provide extensive recreation services. And so it just depends.
I know that we're going to have a conversation later about the form of governments, and are you going to be the one speaking on that?
I hope not.
All right, then I'm going to pigeonhole you now. We're off the record. What form of government do you find to be, I could say the word effective, or I could say most bozo-proof?
I'll only give you my personal opinion, okay?
Okay.
My personal opinion is any city smaller than 50,000 really should have either a 5 or 6 member council that includes the mayor and a city manager. For a number of reasons. I have spent most of my career working in a council mayor with a full-time mayor. And I'll be very blunt. I very much enjoyed working in that forum, but a lot depends on who's elected mayor. And if you have a good mayor, things go well. If you have a bad mayor, it is hell.
What was the analogy you were using when we were at dinner, Shane?
Which one?
The good leader, bad leader, good king, bad king.
Oh. I can't remember.
You were
You're trying to get me in trouble.
Yes, sir. I'm trying not to get in trouble, but it just goes to your point. I mean, everything depends on the council mayor
Yeah.
form of who that mayor.
Oh, wait, it is, especially for a newly incorporated city, it is incredibly important. When Taylorsville incorporated, it was a mayor council, okay? I think that's what you get. I went through all my interviews with the mayor and with one council member and some other people. They offered me the job. Really excited. I went to my meeting where the council had to consent to my appointment, and everything got really quiet. There was a little bit of whispering going on, and before I know it, it was a 4-3 vote, and I went, what the heck? I thought you wanted me. It was a 4-3 vote, barely, in favor of consenting to my appointment. What I didn't know at the time is that after the incorporation occurred, after the elections occurred, see, it's really, you're all behind this incorporation. You all have the same goal right now. Well, when you become a city, and you have your elected officials become elected officials, that's not necessarily true anymore. People have different priorities for the city, and you have to work through those issues. And it is absolutely critical that your first elected officials stay united. I don't believe that the council mayor form of government lends to that. It has built-in conflict on purpose. It's just like state government, it's just like federal government. There are built-in checks and balances, and it at times gets conflict going. And a brand new city really doesn't have time for that. That's just my own personal opinion. You've got to stay united. You've got to stay focused on joint vision and move forward. And because in the traditional form of government, the 5 or 6 member form of government, you're all basically equal. And so you take more care at making sure that everybody's being brought along.
I can speak to that change in vision. We came here 4 years ago from Long Grove, Illinois, named after a long row of oaks and hickories. And on one side, we were a minimum 2-acre lot, and many were much larger than that. And on one side to the west and the north, we were bordered by also similar villages. We were villages, and with large lots and no street lights and had rural atmosphere. But on the east side, it was typical suburbia with smaller lots and street lights and parks and recreation and all that. Well, we had a park district in Long Grove, but its purpose was to buy up land that would otherwise be developed for some purpose that we didn't want, like apartments and condos that are high density. And that's all it did, is it bought up land and it held it. And there was no tax for the park district. We voluntary donations every year. Somebody write a check, everyone would write a check, and that's what we had. As we grew, more and more of the people that moved into the village were from those city lots adjoining us on the east. They were used to park districts that had ball fields and organized activities, and it was probably not more than 10 years after we moved in when we had a park district that was required to have ball fields and all that type of stuff. So the visions changed because the incoming people didn't have the old timers' vision.
So one of the other issues associated with the different forms of government, mayor council form of government tends to work better with larger cities because they have larger budgets. And they almost every mayor council form of government has a full-time mayor and a chief administrative officer. So they have a city manager essentially working with the mayor. In a really small city, you're not going to be able to afford a full-time mayor and a chief administrative officer. And so you're asking a mayor who has no experience in providing municipal services to be elected and then function full-time as the mayor, providing those services, trying to fill their way through. that kind of situation. And you end up with a lot of trial and error because of it. That's just what
I
happens.
can add to that, I just checked to see how big is the village now. It's 8,200. It lost a few because it's in Illinois, and Illinois is losing residents. And the people in that community had the money to be able to get out, as I term it, escape Illinois. I'm trying to remember where it was. At 8,200, what was I going to bring up? The village hall was an 1800s farmhouse, and it had stairs that were like this tall and about 3 inches deep, so they went really steep. And the village manager's office was upstairs. So the employees were the village manager, a couple of administrative assistants, and those were and at one point we had a building inspector, but eventually figured out it was more efficient to outsource that.
You can now.
Yeah, and they did. And the village hall, for where we conducted the plan commission meetings and the village board meetings, that was, it was like an old, it was just, I don't even know what the building was, but it was smaller than this room by a bunch. And the village board was 4 members and a president who broke ties. That's the only thing you voted on, he or she. And the plan commission, I think we had, and eventually the plan commission and the zoning board of appeals were merged. And there were probably about 10 members in that. And it was all volunteer, except for the 3 paid employees and a hired attorney who came in and consulted.
So on buildings, I do have a question. Our feasibility study has 3 scenarios. 2 of those scenarios envision us buying one of the road maintenance facilities that Weaver County currently has up here in the valley. If we're gonna contract out services for the foreseeable future, is there any reason for us to need to buy that building?
Well, if you're gonna do it if you're gonna contract out for the next 4 years, maybe in year 3 you buy the building in preparation for it. So you just have to kind of look at it that way. But if everything's going well in those public works services with the county, and you don't see a need to do that, then probably don't need to buy it.
Yeah, especially if we're contracting with them, they just use it back.
Then you lease them the space for that last year at a very high rate.
May I ask one more?
Yeah.
With your 8 that the gentleman asked about, identifying those 8. Up here in the valley, I just wanted to clarify, are we doing all of those 8? Or are we looking at the fire department staying with the county or independent?
Sure.
So is the fire department independent?
Yeah, it stays its own district.
So we don't worry about.
It's part of a
fire.
district, so it won't be one of those factors, because you actually have to go through a process of de-annexing from the district, and that's pretty involved.
Yeah, and we don't want to do that.
No.
Same with the school districts.
Same
You
with
know,
the
They are
school.
different governmental organizations.
Okay.
So they would not be thrilled to be absorbed by us.
In the revenue taxation night, we're talking about, that's one of the discussions we had. I'm not sure if it seems like it was a gentleman that asked me, and I plan on bringing the property tax notice and going through every single one of those just to talk about who they are. And almost all of them, just like Shane mentioned earlier, without having even seen the property tax notice, almost all of them won't change at all because they're different.
Okay.
Oh, there you go.
Thank you, I think I've taken enough.
All right, well, thank you very much for
Yes,
coming.
thank you.
Appreciate it.